today you have to grade the site, you've got to pour concrete, then you build on top of it, right? Well, modular construction, you can start building before the site is even prepared, right? You can work in parallel. You also are working in a perfect, kind of controlled environment, ideal working conditions where, your tools are right there, your equipment's right there, your materials are right there, under a roof, so your wood's not getting wet, your equipment's not getting packed, doesn't have to get packed up in your truck and transported every day back and forth.
Welcome to another episode of the Next Generation Design Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Piper. In this episode, you'll hear the conclusion of our three-part series with Derek England, NX Product Manager for AEC and BIM at Siemens Digital Industries Software. In our final chat with Derek, we're discussing modular design and the trends, implications, and solutions it may hold. Derek, before we begin today, can you please give our audience a reintroduction?
I'm Derek England. I'm the NX Product Manager for AEC and BIM at Siemens Digital Industries Software. I've worked in this industry for about 25 years. I've had the opportunity and pleasure to work with some of the most innovative companies in the world and understanding their workflows. And, I've had a small part in helping them achieve some of their productivity goals.
Thank you for joining us once again for part 3 of this series. In part 1, we covered trends in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, as well as what still needs to be done to improve tech integration in the sphere. In part 2, we discussed the benefits of collaboration using multidiscipline building information modeling tools in AEC. Today, we'll be talking about modular design. Derek, could you give us a bit of an overview on the topic?
So modular design, it's been in the news a lot recently, at least in my world. It's been in the world a lot. And when you first tell people about modular design, they kind of give you that look, that's kind of like, there's a stigma associated with prefabricated buildings. Most people equate prefabricated or to prefabrication as modular mobile homes, like my grandparents lived in. But you don't hook it up to a truck and pull modular homes. It's different than that. And when you see some of the prefabricated homes and offices and buildings and hotels being built in Europe, they're beautiful. And there's a lot of economic and sustainability drivers that are putting pressure on the construction companies to embrace modular construction. And today I want to talk about some of these trends and implications and possibilities and solutions for this space.
As you said, the term modular design often has a bit of stigma attached. Can you break down the term a little more and give us some background on the concept?
So traditional methods is like stick build is kind of what you refer to. It's like you pour a foundation, you build up, the walls, and you build on a roof, and that's traditional ways. So modular construction is when you construct a building off-site in a factory setting. It's the same way you would build like a plane or a train or an automobile or, machinery. You build it in a factory. Modular buildings, still are built using the same materials and they adhere to the same building codes. They have, they still have to get permitted and approved. So it's similar, but you build them in a factory and then you transport them on a like a truck or on a boat, and then they get assembled on site using cranes. Kind of like Lego bricks, just stacking them up next to each other and you kind of connect them together.
And it seems like that setup would also be a much more efficient way of doing those things. So what makes modular construction so appealing to customers? What are some factors that might lead a customer to choose it over traditional construction?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why. A key one is just reduction in the labor force, right? So what some of the analysts have found is that for every 2 people that are retiring in the construction industry, only 1 re-enters the workforce. For years and years, we've been telling kids, you need to go to college. You need to go to college. And Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs, he is a big proponent, of this. And he said, has a quote that says, "We've elevated the importance of higher education to such lofty perch that construction jobs are seen as vocational consolation prizes, best suited for those not cut out for a 4-year degree." That's one reason, right? We're not attracting, those kinds of kids into this workforce. So that's a challenge too. One of the, in the skilled labor, it's hard to find.
That definitely makes sense. It also seems to be very relevant to what people are calling the Great Resignation that's currently happening among much of our workforce. So that lack of skilled labor force is leading to major supply and demand issues.
I don't know if you've ever done like construction or remodels, recently, but if you want to find somebody, it's hard, right? And they'll say, yeah, we'll get it done in a month, but it takes them months to get it done because it's hard to keep those people, engaged and on site. With big construction projects, like a third of the time on the construction site is just spent like waiting for information or material or equipment, and so, imagine if you had engineering and construction all under the same roof. That would be a great benefit. If you had a question for the engineer, you could walk upstairs and go talk to him.
Other than the labor force issue, are there any other major reasons modular construction might be more appealing?
Here in Southern California, we have great weather, right? You can build houses all year round. But in many places, it rains and it's get cold weather and it's frigid temperatures and it can cause construction delays, right? And then with regulations now, they want these construction companies to kind of clean up their act. They want to produce less pollution and less waste. Even like communities are saying, we don't want, dust and noise and light pollution. You need to be sensitive to those, communities as well. And I think there's just a feeling that, we've been building houses for the same way for, decades, and we're not going to achieve new efficiencies without changing the way we do things.
How do you see modular construction being able to address those specific issues that you've pointed out?
Well, one of the quick and obvious ones is that, it's faster. It can be faster. You can imagine, so today you have to grade the site, you've got to pour concrete, then you build on top of it, right? Well, modular construction, you can start building before the site is even prepared, right? You can work in parallel. So site preparation and construction of the building happen in parallel. So you can see that there's a benefit there. You also are working in a perfect, kind of controlled environment, ideal working conditions where, your tools are right there, your equipment's right there, your materials are right there, under a roof, so your wood's not getting wet, your equipment's not getting packed, it doesn't have to get packed up in your truck and transported every day back and forth. So that's a big benefit.
Definitely. I can see how that would also go back to what you've emphasized in our previous episodes about collaboration between the various disciplines. What other issues can be addressed?
The quality is typically better because you are manufacturing in this kind of perfect environment, and the quality has to be good enough that you can actually take this room, this module, pick it up with a crane, put it on a truck, drive it across, or put it on a boat, float it across the ocean and then assemble it again. And so it's got to be sturdy enough to do that, which is, means it's pretty well built quality. So that's another benefit.
And what about in regards to those issues you've identified with the workforce?
It's hard to find somebody who can do everything, that can do drywall one day and rebar another day and then or concrete or whatever, right? Framing, and they're expensive to find and hard to retain too, because they're in such high demand. And so on the construction's production line, you could say, okay, I need to hire somebody. This is your job on the construction line. He's got one job and he does it every day. And so because he's doing it every day, the quality is good too, because he's the professional at that one task. And so it's easier to train them, and the quality gets better too. But the one that I think, for a construction worker, I think would be, put yourself in their shoes and says, okay, I'm driving all over to different places, locations throughout my city or my state, working in all different locations. Imagine if you could just buy a home close to where you work, drive to your work within a short commute, not have to work in the heat of the sun or in the cold of the weather, and be working in a temperature controlled facility. How nice would that be, right? How much would your job satisfaction go up? How much, more would you be able to attract new employees?
So not only is it a place where you're able to double down and hone your skill set, it's also a much more stable, predictable job for those employees. Derek, you've explained how modular design may be a solution to many of the issues plaguing the AEC industry today. But I'm curious to know how the digital twin fits into all of this.
The digital twin, starts back in the, in engineering, right? And today it's kind of starts in engineering. So you have the design, and then you float that, that goes all the way, that data goes all the way through to construction, right? One of the big benefits, like we talked about, is that the digital twin can all occur in one building, basically. The design and construction is all in one facility. So it really helps so that when you have an issue on the site floor, on the factory floor, you can walk down there, show the engineer what's going on, and say, this is why your design stinks, right? And then they could say, oh, yeah, I didn't catch that. And so then they could go back and immediately make a change. Typically, in a typical process, they would just make that change on site. The designer would never know about it. His next design would have the same mistake again. You would never find that. And so this helps with that loop back structure for the digital twin to improve that.
Can you tell us a bit more about what those modular construction assembly lines look like? How do they function?
They vary wildly, right? Sometimes the very high-end ones, right, that some of the ones they're building now, they're highly automated with robots and CNC machines. You can see them seeing robots welding steel cages, or you cutting and sawing and nailing and things like that. So you look at it and you're like, wow, this really is kind of like an automotive assembly line, right? But some modular construction companies have simply just kind of moved construction off-site, right? It's just, I'm still building traditionally with a hammer and a wrench and a nail gun and ladders, climbing up the ladders, and so you haven't really changed the process, right, or innovated the process. You've just moved it, inside, which has benefits, right? We talked about some of the benefits of constructing inside, but it's not like you want to achieve productivity goals like you see in automotive industry. You need to change change the process. You need to automate these things.
That definitely makes sense from a productivity standpoint. What can you tell us about the variations of modular buildings?
And there's two types of modular buildings, and typically they're panelized and volumetric, right? Panelized construction is kind of like assembling like IKEA furniture, right? You get a box and it's got all the pieces together, and then you build it, in your house, right? You didn't have to drill the holes. You didn't have to assemble the hardware and find all the hardware. It kind of came to you all packaged up, right? And so it's much easier to put together IKEA furniture than build it from scratch, right? So that's kind of like panelized construction. The walls already have outlets and conduits and plumbing already inside of it. You just have to connect them on site. Volumetric construction is where you kind of manufacture the entire room or part of a building, right? It's typically they're about the size of a shipping container because that's what can get transported on roads and ships and things like that. But in both cases, these panels or modules are transported to the site on trucks. They're unloaded by cranes, and then workers connect all the modular pieces together.
Which would you say is preferable? Panelized or volumetric? Why would someone choose one over the other?
Panels are nice because they collapse down flat, right? So it's cheaper to ship, substantially cheaper to ship, but it also takes longer to assemble on site. You can imagine these panels get assembled on site. If it's raining there, they're out in the rain kind of, connecting all these things up together. They're getting wet and they have to deal with that, right? Volumetric modules are faster to assemble. You just deliver them on site, you place them next to each other. And with volumetric modules, you can have it almost 90% complete. Some are shooting for like 95% complete. So literally, you put it down, you connect it to electricity, and you feel like you're already in like a bedroom or a hotel room. Yeah, and it's got carpet, it's got wall treatments, it's got furniture, it's got plumbing. Everything is already hooked up, so you can deliver it more like on site. So There's benefits like volumetric modules are great for restrooms and kitchens and stuff like that, but panels can be good for bedrooms and living rooms. And some companies are kind of saying, well, let's use the best of both worlds, right? We'll do panelized for the bedrooms, and then we'll do volumetric for the bathrooms. And you see that a lot in hotels today. Actually, a lot of hotels, when you go to assemble it, they actually have the whole bathroom in one piece, and they just drop it in during construction.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. So it seems like there's definitely a method and efficiency to it, unlike other types of construction. Modular construction seems like it may just be the way forward for AEC companies, and really the future. Can you tell us about any Siemens customers in particular in the modular construction sphere?
One of them that I'm familiar with is Max Bugel, and their construction, they have a modular construction facility just north of Munich, and they've been doing it for a while now. Back in 2017, 2018 timeframe, they wanted to invest in a plant for serial production of modules for like multi-story residential construction. The room modules, you can stack them. And I was there and I was like, how high can you stack them? And they're like, like 6-7 stories high. So you can stack these things on top of each other like Legos, and they're self-supporting, right? You don't need to have an exterior frame to support the weight. They have that support built within them. And then they have like all kinds of different like layouts and configurations.
That sounds pretty incredible. What do those modules actually look like in a real world setting?
They're all about the same size, but they, some will have a wall missing here or cut out here, or, they're just lots of different modules to choose from. So when I went to go visit them, it's just like a production line. There's 16 different stations. Each module stays at each station for 60 minutes, right? And then it moves to the next one. Sounds a lot like, a production line, like an automotive production line. Yeah. Modules are delivered on site and assembled on site. These particular ones are about 80% fabricated, so you'd still put like the flooring in and some wall treatments and things like that. But that it dramatically shortens the time needed, and when you go to on site, it's it's all inside. Because they're using standard modules, they're able to kind of like put them together in different ways. It was fascinating to kind of to see, some of them like, have like one wall missing or two walls missing. And so they actually had on site an example of one of them. And it was pretty cool. So anyway, it comes all pre-assembled. It's got like the sinks and the walls, and it's pretty cool. It's one of the reasons why they chose our software is because these particular things had requirements for concrete. It had requirements for electrical and plumbing and for, and then they wanted it documented, and then they wanted to run right down to CNC. And so they wanted a tool to do all of this. And, the current set of tools that were kind of disparate, they couldn't, go fast enough. And so they really relied on our software to deliver it. One of the customers, let's say a quote from him said, Max Bugel selected Siemens tools because they could not achieve their efficiency goals with other AEC tools.
It sounds like it's a very comprehensive system in terms of addressing that collaboration between disciplines.
Yeah. So it was the integration between all the different tools that was the big benefit. Instead of kind of designing in one system and throwing the electrical stuff over the wall and designing the plumbing in another system, throwing that over the wall, they designed all in context of each other and made changes in context of each other. Yeah.
So were you able to see any examples of the finished product? How did it all come together?
Yeah. So, one, they were they decided to build their whole headquarters using this system, right? So it was, it was in the process of being built, so I haven't seen that yet. But that was the goal was that they were going to design their new headquarters using this. But they did have one on site, and it was like a kind of 2-story office building. And, I kind of thought like, oh, you'd go in there and I'd be able to say, oh, here's where one module ends and here's where the other one begins, and this is how they connect together. I kept looking around kind of trying to imagine like, okay, where's one stop and where's one start? And I couldn't figure it out. It was really amazing how innovative, like you can stack these things in different ways. They don't have to be perfectly lined up right on top of each other. They can stack, perpendicular to each other. And it was really fantastic. And I think that's one of the challenges that like a lot of architects kind of think like, oh, I don't want to do modular construction because it's not going to be, I can't be creative enough, right? It's going to be boxy. Yeah. But what they're finding is those who are embracing it find the opposite. I mean, a lot of the times with homes, the exterior is just a little bit different. They put up bricks instead of rock or, stucco or something like that. And so you're really able to achieve a lot of flexibility in the way it looks. And then inside, I found that it was, and I think they're finding is that, you really can be pretty creative and, get the benefits of, the modular construction, but also have the creativity to kind of design something unique and custom for their customers.
To be able to have that level of creative freedom while prioritizing productivity must be a huge draw. I'm sure they were pleased with that aspect. What other feedback have you heard?
The process they set up, they're really on the forefront of this, right? One of the associate partners from Porsche Consulting came out and looked at this production line that I saw, and they said the Max module concept is revolutionary. It combines standardization, individualization, and industrialization in a single product for construction sites at a uniquely high level of quality. So they're getting noticed, right? And you're going to see more and more people like embracing modular design.
So it sounds like modular design may have some very real effects on the current process of construction. What kind of impact do you see it making on the current U.S. housing crisis?
It takes a long time to build houses and or to convert like office space into like apartments and things like that. There's a lot of challenges to do that. I was just at a town meeting and they were talking about like the governor of California says we need 606, I think he said at least 6 million new units, right, in California. And he said, okay, and then he just distributed and said my little town said you need 6,000 units and you need 6,000 units. And he just kind of distributed and said, everybody, you need to take this on. And they're saying like, we don't have the road infrastructures, we don't have everything. It's really challenging to do this, right? But as far as building them, they know they can be faster, right? Like Max Boogle, I think on their site, they said they can build 20 units, can be ready for residents in just 90 days. Imagine being able to like say, I need 20 units and I can do it in 90 days. Or I can assemble 10 working days, you can assemble, 60 of these modules together. So you could build big apartment complexes as well. So I think you're going to hear more and more about modular design, in the news and, as a way to address this urgent housing market shortage. And, I think urban planners are going to wake up and just say, okay, it's not going to get any better. We got to do something different.
It seems like more recently, the construction process has reached extreme lengths. So I imagine this could be a great solution to that problem.
A company that builds hotels, lots of hotels, a major hotel chain, and they were saying, 10 years ago, it was you could build a 5-story hotel, like a typical 5-story hotel in about 10 months. And he said now it's twice as long, and it's just math. There's half as many people to build, so it's taking twice as long, right? And so, yeah, and it's not getting any better. It's not like all of a sudden they're hiring a lot more people. It's going to get harder and harder. So just because of the workforce shortage, you're going to have to see a change.
What are some of the barriers that you see that might prevent large-scale adoption of modular construction?
It takes a lot of capital to build like a facility like this, like what Max Boogle did, right? And so, okay, I build this facility, I can pump out these modules that look like this, right? So after you get done with that project, maybe somebody else comes in and says, I want the modules to be a little bit different. Now you have to do all the retooling. So keeping that, like, getting enough people to say, okay, this is what I want to do, and getting that, like, flow of orders coming in is hard. And every single time they want to make a change, it says, oh, I want to do this instead of that. Innovation has to happen, right? And it's not like we're still learning, right, how to do it better, right? We don't have like CNC machines to run, chop saws, typically, right? So, okay, now we need to do that. So let's invent that, right? And so that's a big challenge, right? To do the innovation.
Can you tell us about any other major issues that you've identified?
I was surprised to hear about this is that I'd kind of been working with lots of companies in Germany and they hadn't really highlighted this issue, but here in the US, the local regulations and inspection is a huge challenge. So you imagine like, okay, if I'm going to build modular houses, where are you going to build it? You're not going to go to like New York City where it's the most expensive to get labor, right? You go somewhere else. Yeah, you go somewhere else where you got land is cheap and you know it's easier to hire people and the cost of living is lower so that you can pay people, you know, a fair wage, but you know, less. And so let's say you say, okay, I'm going to build this modular house or modular construction in Mississippi, and then I'm just going to drive it across a straight line over to Florida, and then you say, okay, I'm going to install this, and the Florida inspector's like, hold on, wait. I can't permit this. You know, how do I know that your electrical wiring's done right? And the plumbing guy's like, yeah, how do I know your piping is correct?
So that difference in state regulations sounds like a major issue then.
It's like, okay, please tear out that wall so I can see the electrical or the plumbing. And it's like, well, wait a minute. You know, we built it like this in a module, so it's not like easy to do that. And some companies are kind of like, oh, well, we'll build in little panels so that they can inspect them. But how do you do that for 50 states, right? 50 different states, 50 different regulations. It's just not sustainable. And so where you see modular being successful is places like where they have a big enough market to support it. So you see some in California, which is a big enough market to support it. You see it in Germany and in the Nordic countries, you know, because they are able to, you know, there's higher acceptance and then you only have to meet one standard, right? And just sell within your own market.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how hurdles like this are tackled going forward. Derek, looking forward and looking to the future, what place do you see for modular construction?
I have a friend who's in construction. He's like one of the managers over a huge home builder, and he said, you know, they're just watching and they're just waiting, right? And they know we're at a tipping point and it's really close because they can't keep going the way they're going, but they also know that it's going to be hard to make this change, and so they're just waiting for that tipping point. He's not sure when it's going to happen, but it's close. You know, we just don't have the workforce to do it, right? You know, there's Danny Forster from Danny Forster and Architects. He's been working to build modular hotels in New York. You know, this big project, and the benefits on paper were there, right? It was really clear that there was benefits to do this. You know, he's working with Warren Buffett to kind of streamline some of those regulations, and Warren Buffett was on board to do that. But it was just, you know, in the end, you know, they had to manufacture it overseas. They got caught up into shipping. They got delayed at the port, you know, and then all the schedules kind of got thrown off because the modules weren't showing up in time.
So there are still some of those very practical issues to be sorted out, it sounds like.
On paper, it looked great, you know, you kind of just throw your hands up and say, you know, one thing we can agree on is the way we build buildings today is dumb. This is from Danny Forster. He says it's not efficient. We have not innovated or improved in 100 years. And, you know, I've heard other people just say, like, I mean, honestly, you know, what's really super innovative that's happened since the time of, like, you know, the Romans built roads, you know? There hasn't been so much innovation. And I think, you know, we're kind of hit that wall where we need to really do something innovative, just strictly because, you know, labor force, but then you're going to see a lot of fringe benefits, you know, with improved quality and improved speed of construction. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time, I think.
Will modular housing eventually be a more affordable option for consumers?
Today, they're more expensive. There are certain situations when it's cheaper, like I kind of talked about when Danny Forster was working on that hotel. You know, on paper, it's supposed to be cheaper because, you know, you have a small site, you know, 100 feet by, you know, 75 feet or something like that. It's tiny. You know, where do you have laydown area? Where do you put your wood? Where do you put all your construction material if you're building a high rise in the middle of a city, right? Imagine if you just had a crane there and you're just delivering stuff on site and you're just stacking these modules on top of each other, you don't need that laydown area. And so for situations like that, yeah, it makes a lot more sense. But then when you look at my friend who's got, building houses here in Southern California, you can really almost set it up where it's like, okay, every day I'm going to have one house complete. And it's almost like an assembly line. This house is done, this house is done, this house is done. And you just like, this is the task for this guy on this day. And then he does the same task the next day. So, they're able to simulate that pretty well in California. But in other areas where you got remote locations and you don't have access to the workforce, or you don't have good weather and things like that, it's going to be slower adoption, right?
Before we wrap up today, are there any other big innovations on the horizon that you'd like to share and tell us about?
So this is something that we're kind of excited about. I've been working on it for a while. It's a new product that's an add-on for NX. So our product NX has traditionally served companies that do planes, trains, automobiles, stuff like that, right? Machinery. And lots of OEMs, like, if you're designing a product for construction, there's a good chance that product was designed using our software as well. So if you do door hinges or locks or maybe, I don't know, form boards and stuff like that, it could have been designed using our software, right? But that hasn't traditionally been used to actually design like the buildings itself, right? And so we've had several customers that said, hey, we do like electrical substation, right? And 95% of the stuff you see in the substation is all your product. It's all NX, right? But we also need a 4-wall building. That's it. And so they're like, what do you got? And they're like, I got nothing. You can design it using traditional tools. And he's like, no, that's not really what we want. We really want, something that's like, to build buildings. And so we start hearing this over and over again. There's just a need. The guys who design like a missile, they also needed to redesign the missile silo, right? And so what do you use for that? And so this digital twin you'd kind of asked about, you want to capture all of that together, right? You don't want just like dispersed between lots of different tools. You'd love to have this digital twin in one integrated, environment. And so what we see is the need to have the ability to design a building in context of other things, right? And so that's kind of our initial target market right now. We imagine engineering will come in and say, okay, we know we're going to have a digital twin. We know we want to have a building in context of, other things. We can use this new product NX for BIM. And so it's getting released at the end of the year. I'm hoping this podcast comes out after the end of the year so that we don't pre-announce anything. But I'm super excited about releasing it. I'm excited to get feedback from our customers as well.
Thank you again to Derek for sitting down for the conclusion of our 3-part series. Thanks also to our listeners for tuning in to today's episode. Join us next time for more discussions about the latest in design innovation and software applications. I'm your host, Jennifer Piper, and this has been Next Generation Design.